in Latin America. Thank you very much. It's interesting to see how technology is causing stress, because we lost the connection and we all went into chaos. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here and be able to share with you some reflections. Manish has already said beautiful things. We need to start with our personal experiences, and that is something that I will do. I feel very excited because for Mexico was very important for me in the 90s. I visited this country many times, especially because of the Zapatist movement. I was in touch with many friends, Marga here, people at UNAM, Esther Cesenia, John Holloway, and others. And the second thing that I wanted to say is that I believe that this is a very important conference. I'm certain that in the future this will be a reference point for Latin American debates and beyond in this process of searching for a global solution to our civilization crisis. It is not only a beginning. It would be a mistake to understand this as a start, but rather it is a very important process that is ongoing. I wish to thank all of the organizers, those who are visible and invisible, especially Miguel Valencia, Leila Samar, the Frederick Ebert Foundation, Christian Singh, Manuela Mates, and others. I feel so pleased to be able to share my thoughts and ideas in a group that is working with alternatives to work in Quito as of 2011. I've been working with María Estela Banca, Martín Lac, Rafael Merca, Alberto Acosta, Carol Ander. I've been working with them. The three books that I present on the screen, one in English, Limits to Capital Nature, the one with Alberto Acosta, A Way Out to the Capitalistic Labyrinth, where we speak about the debates of degrowth and post-extractivism. You can find it online, and another one in German, which will be translated into other languages. It's on mobility. Before I begin, let me share a reflection that I had after the first 2 days about the very same concept of degrowth. Yesterday, Tony Doshim and debated, and in Leipzig we also had the same debate, whether this concept of degrowth was applicable to the Global South experiences. João Paulo Muraca, many other people have talked about this. I believe that as an explicit concept, it doesn't make much sense for the Global South experiences. It is a concept of the Global North, especially Europe, the United States. But as an analytical perspective to understand the core elements of capitalism, imperialism, and as a horizon for emancipation globally, I believe it's very important. The implicit concept seems also very relevant to be discussed here in Latin America and in India, but not as a concept. Environmental justice, Manish has also spoken about this, Ubuntu, the good living, all of those concepts perhaps reflect that idea better. But anyway, in spite of it all, today we speak about wealth. And when Aleida and Miguel wrote to me a few weeks ago, telling me that this was the subject I had to talk about, my first reaction was, okay, well, I speak about wealth and capitalism. But then I had the first statement of Marx from the Capital. I remember that when he said, the wealth of societies in the capitalistic production system is like an enormous arsenal of merchandise. So the enormous production and productivity and overproduction of societies that live under capitalism and capitalistic reproduction, as the feminists have said, have enormous implications regarding others. The impoverishment, exploitation, international division of labor, the destruction of nature, we've spoken about that, the destruction of future itself. Manish has also spoken about the contradictions of modernity. And in this context of understanding not only how destructive but how ambiguous capitalistic production is and how destructive is the crisis it has caused in its own productivity, this has led us, Marcos and myself, to work on the concept of the imperial lifestyle. We wish to connect this to the structures of capitalistic globalization, the social, economic, political, and cultural structures like racism. Those are the daily institutional practices in our societies, in our everyday lives, especially in our context. Germany, Austria, the countries where we live in. The second point that we wish to understand with this imperial lifestyle is how those different realities in the world are connected to the macroeconomic level, but also at the micro one. In Europe, sometimes the preconditions of these aspects are denied. In Europe and in Latin America, or Asia or Africa. In many times, the global north is never related to the day-by-day situations of the north. And the third concern that led us to this concept was why in the crisis of 2008-2017, with certain ecological consciousness, the policy against climate change, of preserving biodiversity, why at that point of crisis the old industrial production system Joan mentioned, why was it prolonged? Because there was no more serious search for alternatives, in spite of the fact that we knew how deep and destructive the crisis of capitalism was. That is the framework upon which we will develop our work. And perhaps nowadays, in the German book, we also speak about the rise of the ultra-right movement can also be understood because of this, because the promise of the ultra-right movement is, if you vote for us, we will define what Trump has promised, the new Austrian government has promised, the right and the ultra-right movement's promise. The main idea is quite basic and simple. Imperial lifestyle means that through the political, economic structures of geopolitics of the global market, in the mundane aspects of the global north, there is an access, first of all, limitless access to the natural resources and the cheap labor of other countries, especially the south. So those theories of imperialism are still alive, and they have to be rethought in this asymmetric relationship. Think of China, think of the boom of commodities in Latin America. In principle, it is a very stable structure. And through our daily lives, our mundane actions, in the production and reproduction systems, this is how we reproduce access to natural resources and cheap labor for a few. And in our societies of the north, yes, but it is a north-south perspective. The consequences have to be made visible. The processes of making the preconditions of mundane aspects made invisible, as Marx has said in the merchandise itself, you don't see it. You don't see the social connections, the ecological consequences of production. In your mobile, you don't see what has been caused, the impact. In the meat you eat, you don't see how animals were affected. In the cars, you don't see how aluminum was extracted, and so on and so forth. So it is important to make that visible, those externalities, those processes of externalization of those preconditions and the consequences of the production means and lifestyle of the global north, those have to be made visible. And this imperial lifestyle is is important to express because the hegemony is hidden in our desires. In our societies, it is normal to have the greed to have more and more. The newest cars, the biggest houses, etc. In Germany, there's still a great debate between the unions and the left. We say that this imperial lifestyle is pervasive in all places. Everyone is living in an imperialistic way and are reproducing that style. Obviously, according to the social status and income, people have different practices of living and reproducing the imperial lifestyle, but generally speaking, we all do. So we don't deny the strategies of companies, of capitalism, the logic of capital accumulation. We do not deny the strategies of powerful states and governments, but we also want to focus our attention on those persistencies. In Latin America and in other places of the world, it's also important to speak about the imperial lifestyle because when there is a capitalistic dynamic in the global south, many people, and fortunately more and more, many people are attracted to the imperial lifestyle. Yesterday, we went with the Ever Foundation to another seminar in transportation. Mexico City is a mess. It is decreasing the life quality of people. If it takes a person an hour and a half to travel 1 kilometer because of the persistent traffic jams. So the aspiration of a better life standard, having a second car instead of improving the life quality, it is decreased. It's not only the consumption basket, but it's also the way we relate with one another. In Mexico, like in Germany, it is the automobile industry that's been sold. It is being legitimized as the backbone of the economy because they give jobs and bring prosperity, and that is something that has to be questioned. So Antonio Gramsci and his concept of hegemony says that in spite of all of the conflicts, Joe has also explained, him and many others, there is a normalized aspect of our modern-day actions that normalizes cheap labor and the abuse of nature, and means then that in countries such as Germany, Austria, and others, good living is not the good living as Alberto understands it. It's not how it's been sold to us. As many alternatives, in Germany, good living is having more cars, more mobiles, more dresses, more meat, more and more and more. That is the logic of growth at the micro level in the context of a capitalistic society. So we say, and I think this is clear already, that the lifestyle and the imperial production system is not generalized because not everyone can afford to live the imperial lifestyle like that. The imperial lifestyle requires an outside. Its milieu, as Roxalou has said, is one of domination, of slavery, of brutal destruction of nature. So to conclude this part and get to my conclusions, I must say that in a country like Austria or Germany, we are running the risk, and we've already had a workshop on this, we're running the risk of having the problem with the environment, but in a selective way, an excluding way. It is the green capitalism, but it's still, as John has said, by quoting Quarks, it is a green capitalism in certain parts of the world, but at the expense of the future. Another conclusion is that because of the means of production, the modes of production, international conflicts eco-imperial conflicts will become intensified. If China goes to Africa, competing with the European capital to get the land there, to get the land grabbing, the green grabbing, then there's a conflict of the land, and that's imperialism that will be intensified. And the last point is, we have to understand clearly what's happening in Latin America. Stabilization of the imperial lifestyle has a very authoritarian trend. Obviously, it's a hegemony in the daily life, but in the intensification of the political, economic, ecological crisis, there's a strong trend of being more and more totalitarian, authoritarian. Two things to wrap up. I don't have a way to explain alternatives in 4 minutes, but I'll just share two ideas. And later we could discuss it. If I understood David correctly last night at the plenary session, he said that post-capitalism, because obviously the alternative to what I've said is also post-capitalistic, David said yesterday that we have to start over, start from scratch. And I don't think that's the case. At least I questioned that. I doubt it. When I heard David last night, I was thinking about the famous letter of Marx in 1943, addressed to Arnold Gruber, when Marx said, and I quote, "We are not anticipating the world in a dogmatic way, but rather we want to find the new world by means of a criticism of the old one." Well, we're not confronting the world in a doctrinary way with a new principle, but rather we are developing the new principles for the world stemming from the old principles of the world. And this is something that could be debated, and for us it is fundamental. That's what we're doing here. Where are the contradictions? What is existing that is emancipatory, that is not romanticizing the indigenous peoples, but rather to really analyze and push forward the search of feasible alternatives that already exist. Before my time's up, I would like to conclude with something that is overwhelming to me, and we'll discuss here and perhaps during the coffee break as well. Emancipatory, civilizing project, anti-capitalistic one, has to consider social discourses and political practices and policies that we have underestimated in the emancipatory debates. Neoliberal capitalism has won this debate so far. I'm saying this to provoke. This matter of freedom. The idea of freedom in debates, because let's go justice and freedom, they have to be balanced. I don't think so. If the concept of imperial lifestyle is possible, it means that as an organizing principle should be not living at the expense of others, not to live at the expense of nature. And that means for a debate of policies. Manish said this when he spoke about the experiences in India, setting boundaries. It's all about setting boundaries, putting rules of the game. Federico said this on Tuesday. We need to be in favor of rules. Other people say, you want to forbid everything. Professor Brown wants to forbid. We cannot accept it. But that's ridiculous. We do need rules. We need to set boundaries. We should set a limit to the capital flows because they are not limitless. We should limit the idea of limitlessly investing in mining, limiting the idea of buying whatever thing at whatever price. I've already given an example of this, but a true emancipatory policy in Mexico City would be put a limit. Don't accept the destruction of the city any further by allowing more and more cars and many more other things. That's a false freedom to think that I can use my car, because since I have so much money, I can buy more and more cars. And this can be applied to other things, food, etc. But the experience in Mexico City seems puzzling to me because of this. Federico said on Tuesday that degrowth is not to have less, it's not to decrease, but rather to do things differently. Practice mobility differently in Mexico, Buenos Aires, Vienna, Berlin. Do things differently, and this has to do with interest and infrastructure. So I believe that, and with this I conclude, we need to rethink, amongst other things, as democracy, the production-reproduction systems. We also need to rethink freedom. Thank you very much.